in the image of God was a life-changing paradigm shift for me. I want to explain the small part of this infinitely meaningful idea that I have come to understand in the hope that you might benefit from that. First of all, I want to outline my experiences in an area of my life where this has most benefited me so that I can avoid being too abstract, and it will aid in me being able to convey my ideas better. So that's what I'm going to do in this first part of a two-part series. In the second video, I will explain what I understand about being made in the image of God and the value that it has brought to my life. So, we begin whenever I was a young teenager. I had the same worldview as any other teenager. I had the same sexual urges as any other teenager. And I had no moral quandaries about them. I was just a kid with no confidence. I wanted a girlfriend really badly. By the time I was 16, I'd experienced a few rejections, and in my terrible pride, I concluded that I wasn't the problem. The girls were the problem, that the world was the problem. It's a case of always finding fault without rather than within. I had no comprehension of this at the time, but it was an utterly reprehensible state of mind. I blamed everything and anything except myself, who was the actual culprit of the problem. Now, this is a terrible pathway that you can walk down, and it leads to some very dark places. But I believe that it was my incredible upbringing and the outlet to pursue a goal that the gym provides that allowed me to avoid those very dark places and stop those terrible spirits from taking full control of my actions. I suppose somewhere in my subconscious I still believed in life over death. I still had some hope in spite of my prideful, destructive thoughts. But I still harbored this ill will, however. I still felt that it was me who had been mistreated and that I hadn't done anything wrong. I still couldn't find fault in the manner that I went about attempting to achieve my goals, or I couldn't see that the goals that I was trying to achieve might not have been the correct goals. So instead of recognizing that it was my pride that was the problem and letting go of that pride, I refused to let go of it. I didn't want my pride to die. So, and even though it was pretty battered, I decided that I didn't want to face my insufficiencies. So I generated a rationalization to avoid having to expose my pride to criticism or to expose it to reality. And that was that I was focusing on myself. I go into the destructive and damaging nature of rationalizations in a different video. It's titled Advice to My Younger Self. You can click the pop-up banner to view that video. There was another facet to my beliefs around this time as well, another aspect of this rationalization that I was generating, and it was that I started to develop a strong sense of the immorality of casual sex. And I do think that initially this was motivated by my desire to not shatter my pride, to keep my pride intact. Because I didn't want to experience rejection. I didn't want to go and risk embarrassing myself and losing status. No one wants to do that. So that's why we generate these rationalizations, to protect ourselves from revealing our insufficiencies. But I think that This idea of the immorality of casual sex was something that, although motivated by the wrong reasons, I do believe that it was motivated partially by the right reasons. So when I was around that 16, 17 mark, I don't know if it was the voice of my parents talking to me, the lessons that they subconsciously inculcated in me when I was younger, the voice of the priest at Mass who I didn't really listen to. In fact, I thought he was silly. Or maybe it was a lesson I learned from a book or a YouTube video, or maybe it was the Spirit of God himself coming to me in the voice of my conscience. Maybe it was a combination of all those things. But there was a growing sense of the immorality in casual sex that didn't stem from this rationalization. Initially, I still succumbed to the urge to watch porn when I was 16, 17. And that just shows you that the motivation that I had to avoid the immorality of casual sex was not true. It wasn't a true aim, because it wasn't strong enough to stop me from participating in watching porn, which is arguably more immoral than casual sex. If you think about it, all the fears of embarrassment and rejection disappear, and the only motivation that you could possibly have to stop yourself from watching porn would have to be true. It would have to be a proper motivation that genuinely corresponds to a belief in the immorality of this action. Because there are a lot of people who will say that they think that casual sex is immoral, but in reality, they just can't participate in those kinds of acts because they don't have access to them. They just aren't the alpha males who do have access to casual sex, so they rationalize away their insufficiencies by saying that they're just avoiding it because they think it's immoral. So I didn't have enough faith to stop watching porn, but there were genuine inklings of faith from those sources mentioned before, and they continued to grow in me. But I still thought that the idea of God was silly. I couldn't link these ideas that were coming to me through my conscience with the idea of God. There was a turning point that I remember, and it was watching a video from the channel Christ's Forgiveness by Pastor David Lynn. He was preaching in Belfast, which is a city close to where I live in Ireland. This video provided a link between the implicit subconscious knowledge I had of the sexual immorality and God. I feel as though it was at this moment that I fell from the peak of Mount Stupid into the valley to begin the true upward climb. The Dunning-Kruger effect was in full force, a trend from naivete, where I didn't know anything about the deeper and more meaningful motivations that humans can have in life. I just had my primal urges and I wanted to fulfill them. I didn't understand the idea that we can transcend those primal urges. And then I went to nihilism, where I was cynical and prideful. And then all that confidence in the small amount of knowledge that I had came crashing down. I had what you might call a paradigm crash. The possibility that I had been so wrong my whole life was a scary thought, but somewhere, something was telling me that this was right, that I had to do away with all of those prideful beliefs that I had before. But the problem was, I didn't have any kind of an explicit understanding to the point where I could articulate my beliefs to others, or to myself for that matter. My newfound openness to God had no defense against my self-doubting proclivities, the self-doubting devil on my shoulder. That is why I'm making this video series. I have come to understand the idea of being created in the image of God to the extent that it does hold up against my self-doubting and self-denigrating proclivities. And I believe that there's huge value in being able to articulate the thoughts that you have, because if someone who is intelligent comes to you with a nihilistic and prideful and cynical belief, and you don't have any defense to that, that's gonna open you up to self-doubt and negative emotion, because you're not going to be able to defend your beliefs effectively. And you might say, well, how do you know that the beliefs that you hold are beneficial to others? Well, I don't, but I'm just here to offer my perspective, because these beliefs have helped me massively in my life. And if I could have understood the ideas that I'm going to lay out in part 2 of this video, I would be much, much better off. And I hope that the same is true for some people who may be watching this video. So please look out for part 2 of this series. Thank you very much for watching, and God bless.